Hey, Dan Beagleman here. This video is on the Locrian Mode. It's the 7th in a series of 7 videos on the modes based on the major diatonic scale. In this video, like the preceding 6 videos, I'll talk about the chemistry or the formula for the Locrian Mode, what makes it sound the way it does. I'll talk about applications for soloing, improvising, just all general applications. And I'll also discuss the type of chord or chords you can use the Locrian Mode with. And then I'll also get into showing you how to connect the Locrian Mode with the correct pentatonic and blues scales to make the most out of your playing. Okay, on to the Locrian Mode. What gives the Locrian Mode its own unique sound, differentiating it from other modes and scales? Every mode, every scale has a sequence to it, a chemistry, if you will, a pattern of steps, half and whole steps. The Locrian Mode, like the other 6 modes, contains 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. A whole step is equivalent to 2 frets on the guitar, a half step is equivalent to 1 fret. And the sequence, or the pattern for a Locrian Mode, is half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. And what do I mean by that? I'll demonstrate a Locrian Mode on one string, and I'll play it horizontally as opposed to vertically across the strings. I'll just play the mode on one string so you can see as I go to my right horizontally that I'm going to be, making use of either 1 or 2 frets from one note to the next. Okay, here's an E Locrian Mode, the open E string. Okay, I'll show you how this works. Open E, there's my root note. Then the next note is going to be a half step higher, F, a whole step higher, G, a whole step higher, then a half step, then a whole step, then a whole step, then a whole step. So after I hit my first note, the next note is a half step or 1 fret higher, then 2 whole steps, then another half step, and then 3 whole steps. And here's an E Locrian Mode, string 6. And one more time. Okay, any note I start on anywhere, if I follow that sequence of half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 I will have a Locrian Mode. Again, that's what gives it its unique sound and why it sounds different than the other modes or other scales. If I look at what I just played, the notes that I just played, there's something interesting to see here. I played all natural notes except I have a B flat. I have E, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E. So 6 natural notes and 1 flat. What scale or key has a B flat? The answer is F, the key of F, or a F major scale. Here's an F major scale. Okay, it has all natural notes but B flat. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. Okay, so what's unique about the Locrian Mode is that it contains the same notes as an F major scale. And remember, F is 1 fret higher than E, or half step above E. So what's interesting is you could think of an E Locrian Mode as an F major scale, and that would mean just playing a major scale 1 half step above the key that I'm in. Here's an E note. If I just play an F scale, sounds like an F chord. But if I start on the E note using E as my key center and returning to E, it sounds quite different. Again, the same exact notes as in the F scale, 6 natural notes and a B flat, but using E as my key center. Okay, F scale, E Locrian Mode. Sounds completely different. So the reason for that is because if I use F as my key center, the sequence is after I hit my first note, I'm going a whole step higher, and a half step higher, and following that. And remember, the major scale is the same as the Ionian mode. Check out my first video in this series on the Ionian mode. So that's really what differentiates these, why they all sound different. It's because after hitting the key note or the root note, what is the sequence that I'm playing as I go forward till I reach the octave when I hit that note again. And all the modes have 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, but it's the combination or the pattern that changes, and that is what gives each mode its characteristic or its unique sound. There are many patterns for the Locrian mode, like any mode or scale, and this one I think is kind of user-friendly because it just sits really nicely in your hands, and the lowest note on the 6th string with your first finger is the key note, so that way you can easily see how to access that for any particular key. I'll use the key of E as an example. So I'm going to play an E Locrian mode in the 12th position. So my first finger is going to be on string 6, fret 12. Here's my E note, and here's E Locrian mode in position 12. And you can hear that characteristic sound, that sort of dark-ish type of a sound that the Locrian mode gives off. Now, as I said before, the E Locrian mode is the same as an F major scale or an F Ionian mode. The second note in the Locrian mode is the F note. So if I start and stop on the F note, and I'll play an F major scale, again I'm going to play the same exact pattern I just played, but instead of starting and ending here, I'm going to start and end here. It sounds like this. And as your F chord, and it sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So it's quite interesting how just by starting on the E note as opposed to the F note really colors the whole thing up. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, with all scales, modes, the sequence pattern changes. If I start on the F note, which gives it the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la sound, it's because the pattern or the sequence is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, starting here. But if I start here, it's half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. And that's really what makes one scale or mode sound different than another. It's the sequence of steps, whole steps, half steps, that really change up the characteristic sound. And with that, that puts it into a different type of category for what kind of chords to use it with. Again, as I said in these other mode videos that I had done, there are 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, and there are 4 minor sounding modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, this one here. And there's 1 dominant sounding mode. And again, there are 3 types of chord categories. There's major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. You know, the 7th and the 9th chords, your bluesy sounding chords. So using the correct mode against the correct chord type or the correct key is really what's important here. The Locrian mode is considered a minor mode, and that's because it has a flat third. If I take an E major scale, remember all chords are built on the major scales, or that's how, you know, the chemistry of chords come from the scale, the major scale. Here's an E major scale. And if I want to make a major chord, I would take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of that, and it sounds like an E major chord. To make a chord into a minor chord, you flat the 3rd. Or, right? Now, if I go back to that pattern I showed you earlier for the Locrian mode in the 12th position, if I take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th degrees of this scale, I have E, G, which is the flat third of E, but now I have a flat 5, not a natural 5. Again, here's an E minor triad in position 12. Here's an E diminished triad, because the diminished triad is 1, flat 3, flat 5. So the point is, the Locrian mode actually has a flat 5th, not a natural 5th, which actually creates a diminished triad. But because it has a minor third, it's still going to be useful or applicable to chords in the minor chord category. But the nice thing about this, or the interesting thing about this, is because of that flat fifth, later in the video when I show you how to link up the Locrian mode with the correct minor pentatonic and minor blues scales, that B flat note, that flat 5, will definitely have an important role in comparing these the Locrian mode to the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale. Being that the Locrian mode is a minor sounding mode because it has a flat third in it, it will join up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scales. Okay? Remember, there are only two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two types of blues scales, major and minor. So you obviously would link the modes up with the correct either major or minor pentatonic or major and minor blues scales. Check out my video on pentatonic and blues scales for a deep dive into those scales with lots of options for fingering patterns and vertical and horizontal playing and just a whole bunch of stuff about those two types of scales. Okay, back to the Locrian mode. As I said, the Locrian mode will link up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scale. Here's the E Locrian mode in position 12 as I showed you earlier. Okay, here's the E minor pentatonic scale in position 12. And here's the E minor blues scale in position 12. Remember, the pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale. The blues scale is a 6-tone scale. It's the the minor pentatonic with the it has that passing tone from the 4th to the 5th degree, and that is what gives it that characteristic sound. But now, by comparing these three, if you overlap the Locrian with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale, you can see that that B flat note in the minor blues scale, the flat 5, is also in the Locrian. Okay? Minor blues, Locrian. The pentatonic has the natural 5th, which is not in the Locrian mode. But if you're in a playing situation like a shredding, kind of thing, where you're playing a million notes a second, it's not going to really matter that much, and it's not going to hurt having a flat 5th or a 5th or a natural 5th in there, unless it's specific that you're playing over some type of a diminished chord or something, and that natural 5th might clash. But usually in shredding, type stuff, just as long as you're in the scale pattern, pretty much you're good to go. So what's the takeaway here? When you're using a Locrian mode, you can mix it up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues scales, and you'll have some nice options. And again, of course, like with all the modes mixing up with the pentatonic and the blues scales, the difference being it's those characteristic notes that are not in the pentatonic, for example, or the blues scale, that differentiates or gives the mode a particular characteristic sound. Again, with the Locrian mode, there are two notes in here that are not in the blues or the pentatonic scale. It's the F and it's the C. Okay? So those two notes, if I didn't play those, I would have the pentatonic minor and or the minor blues scale. It's these notes you could hear right away. That's what gives it that sound, the Locrian. It's like screaming, hey, I'm a Locrian mode. Right? Because if I don't play those notes, now it sounds like your straight ahead rock pentatonic scale. So by including those two notes, again, the pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale. All the pentatonic notes are, basically in the modes, but the modes having 7 tones, it's the 2 extra tones that are not in the pentatonic scale, which really is what gives the characteristic sound to that particular mode. And that applies to all these 7 modes. If you watch all the other videos on the other modes that I did, I'll make that same comparison on all the 7 modes. It's those 2 notes that the modes have that the pentatonic doesn't have. So when you mix them up with pentatonics, again, like I said, if you're playing straight pentatonic, you'll have your basic rock blues scales that will work for most situations. When you add those 2 extra notes in, now you've flavored this up into a particular mode. I like to use a lot of analogies, and sometimes with students that I work with, again, using analogies, I think of, let's say, a seasoning or salad dressing. You know, if you made a salad and you got choice, you have Italian dressing, French dressing, ranch, Thousand Island, whatever. Each mode kind of has a characteristic flavor to it, and it's like, what do you want to use? What salad? What do I want on my salad? Tonight, French or ranch or whatever. What mode do I want to use? Because again, there are, as I mentioned earlier in the other videos, being that there are 7 modes, there are 2 major sounding modes, 4 minor sounding modes, and 1 dominant sounding mode. The dominant sounding mode is the Mclaughlin, which lends itself to 7th and 9th type chords. Now, as I mentioned, there are 4 minor sounding modes: the Dorian, the Phrygian, the Aeolian, which is the natural minor scale, and this, the Locrian mode. So if you're playing in a minor key or against minor chords, you might say, well, gee, there's 4 minor modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Which one should I use? That's when it comes down to some specific details about the modes. The Dorian mode is more suited for rock, jazz rock, and will give you a sound characteristic of guitar players like Carlos Santana, of course in a minor key. Like some of the songs, Evil Ways, Oye Como Va, those things like that. You want to play guitar solos that sound like that, use the Dorian mode mixed up with the minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. The Phrygian mode is more of like a jazz rock fusion type of a mode. Guitar players like Al Di Meola, John Mclaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, some heavyweight guitar shredder type guitar players. The Aeolian mode is good for rock, metal, let's say Iron Maiden, Metallica, Black Sabbath, bands like that. And the Locrian is also good for like jazz rock fusion, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, and I'm sure many other great guitar players. Since I said that the Phrygian and the Locrian are both good for jazz rock fusion, you might say, well, if they both are, where the other 2 modes, the Dorian and the Aeolian, are kind of specific. This belongs here, this belongs here, these 2 belong here. What's the difference? Which one should I use? And that's an interesting thing to look at. Here I'll show you a comparison between the Locrian and the Phrygian. The Locrian mode and the Phrygian mode are exactly the same except for 1 note. If you watch my video on the Phrygian mode, a Phrygian mode is the same as a major scale, 2 whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E and I want to play Phrygian, 2 whole steps under E is C. So I can just play a C scale, which has all natural notes. Okay, but I'll just emphasize the E note, not the C note. So here's an E5 chord. Now I'm going to start on an E note, and I'm going to play all natural notes, no sharps, no flats. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And obviously sounds like it works with that chord. Now I'll play an E Locrian mode. Again, here's the E5 chord. Here's E Locrian. They have 6 similar notes. The only difference is that the Phrygian has a natural 5th. If I'm looking at it from the perspective of E as my key center, the Locrian has a flat fifth. So here's an E Phrygian mode, 1 octave. Here's an E Locrian, 1 octave. Okay, 6 notes are the same. The only difference is the Phrygian has a natural fifth, the Locrian has a flat fifth. And if you think about those two together and then mixing them with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales, a lot of similarities there. But that key difference between the Locrian and the Phrygian is that flat 5. That's Locrian, and that's Phrygian. But they both work really, really well in like jazz rock fusion settings. And again, like I said, heavyweight shredder guitar players, Al Di Meola, John Mclaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, people like that. Two good choices for shredding type guitar soloing. The only difference again is the Locrian has a flat 5, the Phrygian has a natural 5. Now I'll play a little bit demonstrating the Locrian mode mixed with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scales. I'll use the key of E to demonstrate. Check out my video, Modes Summary, where I'll cover the main bullet points of all 7 modes. I'll talk about the chemistry of each mode, the correct type of chord or chords to use the modes with, the connection with pentatonic and blues scales, and just general applications for each particular mode. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. I'm Dan Beagleman, and that's the Locrian mode. Have a nice day.